Hey everybody. So we're going to be going over all the paperwork changes that are happening in the Department of Prisons as of late. So the general idea behind this was to try to make paperwork as painless to do as possible, so Watchmen didn't have to make three separate pieces of paperwork for one inmate per day. So you'll notice that in the paperwork template section, there are now three templates. There is one for internal reports, one for transport reports, and one for visitation reports. And then obviously the work in progress section is still untouched. You'll notice that there are a lot less tags than there used to be, and this is to kind of reduce clutter and make things a little bit more succinct to read. We'll be going over tags in a little bit here, but otherwise, you'll also notice that the behavior reports section is gone. This was merged with internal reports because we found that Watchmen were typically writing behavior reports and internal reports, and they were basically covering the same thing, so we decided to make life easy and combine the two. So instead of having to write two different reports, you just have to write one. Also, we've kind of changed the naming pattern for a lot of these files. So, for example, you'll notice that we're kind of getting rid of the Watchman inmate date title and more opting for more explanatory type of title. So, for example, the title is going to be of the events. It should be talking about a specific individual. If that individual isn't known, you just write unknown. And that's just kind of the general process that we've gone through over here. So, a couple things of importance is the file work on the right is relatively unchanged. There's some examples of the paperwork that we'll be briefly touching on. But then over here, you'll notice that we have some new stuff. Simply put, we moved the visitation vans over to the front so they're much more easy to see. And then we added the storage crates that you'll find around Sisika. So if you go in here, you'll see that everything is laid out in a grid format. So, for example, the stuff that is on the x-axis is A through J. The y-axis is 1 through 5. So A1 is the top left corner, and that contains canned strawberries. Whenever you make or add things to the box, you are required to make a comment with your rank and name, what you added, and the position it's in. We also are trying to reduce clutter, so please do not put boxes full of things in our storage boxes at Sisika. We have far too much stuff. Please stop. Also, we have our Sisika resources, vendors, and volunteers things just down below. Alrighty. As for paperwork, it's pretty self-explanatory. The forms are very short, and the titles are even shorter. So essentially, you'll notice that we don't have nearly as many tags as we did before. And the ones that we did keep are pretty self-explanatory. We added a couple, so we'll go over them right now. This graphic will be in the Watchman clarifications chat if you ever want to reference it. Obviously, the only ones that are really of note are we added the aggressive behavior tag, which is people who are being aggressive to Watchmen on the island and transports. And we also added an escape attempt tag, trying to escape from transport or from the island. It should be noticed that inmates getting hurt on the island or on transports are inmate injuries, and Watchman injuries are Watchmen getting hurt on duty, and things like that. If you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to a member of DOP Command. We'd be happy to answer these for you. Otherwise, we're just going to go over some new paperwork examples pretty quick, just kind of explain some stuff. So this first one is the Battery of Mr. Mariner by Jebediah Joe. You'll notice that it was made by Bob Mariner, had the following parties listed on it, right? Mr. Mariner, he was the government/visitor. Mr. Joe, he was the inmate. Basically, throughout this report, Mr. Joe was belligerent to Watchman today, didn't want to do his work, basically a behavior report. But then in a separate instance later on in the day, he tried to essentially escape by filing a ticket on a piece of bark and then attacking Bob Mariner when Mr. Mariner refused. In this instance, he was shot, Mr. Mariner was hurt, and there was medical done, which is why we have these three tabs. It should also be noted that you could put things like aggressive behavior or suspicious behavior, but the goal of this is to be as succinct as possible. So if you feel like you're adding tags just to have more tags, don't. And yeah, obviously this would also need DOPC attention, things like that. Otherwise, inmates can have medical conditions before they come to Sisika. So, for example, Mr. J. Rickett was dealing with opium withdrawal before he came to the prison, and so we wrote up a report letting people know that he was dealing with opium withdrawal and was informed by deputies on the transport, and he's going to need medical attention at Sisika. Um, Otherwise, with the suspicious behavior tag, this is going to cover a lot of the stuff that happens at Sisika that we might not have all the pieces for. So, for example, someone tried to break into Holloway's office, and Holloway found out because there were wood shavings on the ground. It looks like someone tried to use a tool with a sharp edge. You'll notice that the description of events section is always just the summary of everything that happened, and then the extra notes are kind of what you want people to take away from this. So, for example, the door wasn't like this when Holloway clocked in, and he thinks it were these two inmates, and they should be searched next time they're awake. Think of it as like your kind of recommendations on next steps. Work details and transport reports are still in the same section. We just got rid of the transport tag because it was just unnecessary clutter. As always, be sure to read the top parts because they are considered essential information and in dealing with inmate watchman ratios. This one, pretty simple. With these types of reports, the location is where you're going. So, for example, on a on a work detail, you're going to be going from Sisika to somewhere. On transport, you're going to be going from somewhere to Sisika. We know Sisika is a constant. We don't need to hear about Sisika. We want to know where you're going or where you're coming from, so that way we can have a reference for what's happening. And then the description of events. The group was out in the fields for a while. Some deputies rode up. Nothing too crazy here. You'll notice that some inmates were lazy, some weren't, that type of stuff. And you'll also notice that we have kind of set titles for things. So we have work detail of Johnson, Robertson, Harrison. If this was another work detail, the consistent terms would be work detail of and the date after the inmate names. What we don't want to really see is watchman names in the titles anymore, and we don't want our titles to be insanely long. So the idea here is try to keep it short, succinct, and have it be a sentence. So for this next one, this is just a standard transport where the inmate is belligerent. Obviously, this is aggressive behavior. We want to address this. If you have to give a sentence, obviously, if it's one inmate, it's pretty simple. Write 80 months. If it's multiple inmates, like we'll get to in a second, write each name, then the month, location you're moving from, things like that. Nothing too insane. Next up, this one is an escape/death transport. Obviously, if there is a death, this is always attention DOPC. This was an escape attempt where they tried to escape custody before they got to Sisika. And you'll notice that this could have things like inmate injury or medical info, but that inmate never made it to Sisika, so we don't need to update the medical division or other watchmen on their well-being because they're dead. Yeah, and it's just an attempt to kind of keep clutter down. Obviously, if someone's dead, a medical alert isn't needed, they're dead. The visitation reports haven't really been changed too much. Otherwise, we are using this new system where when you're filing the report, you do your name and on the date that you're filing it. The involved parties in this instance are government/visitors, so Sheriff's Office, LEO, DOJ, USMO, that type of thing. Nothing too insane. The inmates are still inmates. Time of arrival, departure, reason for the visit, reason to deny, things like that. Yeah. Otherwise, the one big thing that we want to take away, and a lot of people are going to be asking, is what do we have to do with behavior reports? So behavior reports have been rolled into the internal reports, and the goal with them is to make sure that we essentially describe the situation. Alrighty? So if an inmate is doing something in one situation, like for example, we'll say John Doe went and assaulted a watchman at like mid-afternoon, and that's a whole report. And then like 2 hours later, John Doe was belligerent and didn't do work well, right? That's another report. That's two different instances where the same person was involved, but that's two different reports. is kind of the goal we're going for. So try to report on your situation. If you have comments to add about it, please add them in the comments below the cards. And that's pretty much it. Obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to ask a member of DOP Command or put it in the Watchman Captain chat or Watchman Clarification chat. Uh, Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.